It has been some time since I last looked at Eternal Crusade, and with fair reason. Many games which go through open development now, e.g. Star Citizen, Squad, have periods where only some small changes are going to take place. This means that I often have to wait before it's worth coming back in with a report on the situation with the game. Eternal Crusade, I'm pleased to say, has come on in leaps and bounds. Previously, what we saw months ago, when I last looked at the game, it felt a bit more like toy soldiers than the grim darkness of the future. That has definitely changed in the months of updates that have taken place, and Space Marines now feel more solid, weighty in their movements. When you run, tumble and generally move around, your character sounds and looks more as you would expect. Now, I think many people would make the obvious comparison to the relic title Space Marine when it comes to overall gameplay and quality of mechanics, and with fair reason. It was an awesome game and one of the few titles that I feel has done some justice to the universe of 40k. So I decided to best balance my opinions on Eternal Crusade, I should take a look back at the multiplayer of Space Marine, if it's still populated, and if so, what is the gameplay in the multiplayer like? The results were surprising. You often remember games far differently than they actually played to you at the time, rose-tinted nostalgia and all that, Bad Company too. So my look at the Space Marine multiplayer was actually incredibly beneficial in giving a solid point of reference for Eternal Crusade. One thing, the movement and overall feel of the environments was very comparative to Eternal Crusade, in a good way. Also, previously one of my main sticking points with Eternal Crusade, the time to kill, I found to be actually very similar in the Space Marine multiplayer. This was surprising as I remembered it being fairly different. I still feel though that the time to kill could be stretched a little further in Eternal Crusade. I'll talk more on that later. The Assault Marines played out really excellently. They were the best, giving you that freedom and aggression you feel in Eternal Crusade as well. I tried out most classes in Space Marine and again found the play to be very surprising and not at all dissimilar from Eternal Crusade. So it was one of those strange things to come back into EC having played Space Marine. Somehow felt different to me. It felt not unlike moving from, say, Battlefield 3 to Battlefield 4, both, very comparable with some slight mechanical and visual differences. EC still has a fair way to go before it's ready, to be sure. The vehicles, for example, whilst now improved, still have a fairly clunky and often glitchy state of affairs happening with them, and this obviously needs to be resolved. They sometimes just slide around too much, or they just don't really want to follow your commands to the point where you want to just get out and start smashing them. The general weapon play in Eternal Crusade feels far better than it did in previous iterations though. What hindered this greatly will be no surprise to anybody. Players. The games we played on EC were a real mixed bag, and again, to be clear, not unlike any other modern multiplayer shooters. Your team always seems to be all or nothing, and never anything in between. Now, it's far too early to judge the game on that basis though, seeing as they are yet to introduce a party system to join games with, something which we really badly need if it really wants to get to grips with testing how players engage with objectives and then making any alterations if necessary. Currently, in order to play with friends in a squad, you just have to try and sync when you're joining a game and hope it throws you into the same round, and then change squad so you're playing together. This actually works most of the time, but it still needs to be changed ASAP so that we can start assessing how much people are actually battling one another for the map objectives and not just running around randomly locking down choke points and generally focusing on the shooting. Now, I know, surely the shooting is a large part of the game. Yes, but with it, without people moving and trying to focus on the objectives in a similar way that other multiplayer shooters seem to be going, it does end up just becoming then fairly tedious and it feels kind of pointless as well. You need that push and sense of purpose to add real interest to what it is that you're doing, and when we have some kind of squad system there, we're able to see how effectively people are actually doing that. So let's talk about the time to kill. This, as with any game, is a fairly contentious issue. Many feel it's fine as it is, some feel it's too long, some too short. I personally feel like right now it's a little too short. As I said though, with my comparison to Space Marine, it was surprising to note that the time to kill in EC is actually fairly similar. However, I still feel it needs lengthening, but by how much? I would suggest something like 15 to 20%, but again, this is for Space Marines. For other factions, Eldar and Orc, it remains to be seen how that's going to be balanced. Still though, with the time to kill in Space Marines, I feel that we should be seeing a TTK pushing, like I say, something about 15%. That feels about the right amount to enable you then to survive crossing some areas of open cover under light fire, but that you'll still be dropped with fire from multiple units or in heavy burst situations in CQC from other enemies. There's an important feature to note with anything 40k when it comes to time to kill. For starters, there is the obvious technology element. These units are based around highly futuristic tech. Now, the weapons, of course, will scale with this accordingly, but at the same time, there are situations where you would just expect that defensive tech to match up against those scaled weapons. So as I say, when crossing an open area of cover under fairly, lightish fire from maybe one other unit, I would expect Space Marine armor to largely deflect and protect you, but in more heavy situations, not so much. That's just the way in which this universe and the gameplay should, feel and be designed. But take a hit from something like a heavy plasma or las cannon or heavy bolter burst, then yeah, you're gonna go down still. The really key aspect when it comes to 40k though is the physical combat, and that's directly linked to this TTK. 40k has a far broader sense of close combat than nearly any other shooter. Most games rely on just a knife or a smack with the rifle butt to the enemy, grab the head, break the neck like in Killzone, and then it's just a one-hit kill. The principle, I suppose, being that you're generally meant to be shooting your target, so if you do get into that close quarters, you want to wrap it up as quickly as possible and then get back to shooting. This is absolutely not the case when it comes to 40k. For starters, it's based off of a tabletop game, and so the close quarter element is a large part of it. Now, this is something that I have played myself, and when those units get into close quarters, it's not a case that they just get wiped out really quickly. There's often a sort of an ongoing battle there. Nothing to say that Eternal Crusade actually has to be based off of the tabletop game in the way it plays out there at all. However, this is part of the 40k universe, and if you kind of disregard that and you don't have that ability to either get into close combat or it's resolved too quickly, it really sort of detracts and takes out of the universe. And I think it's an opportunity, you're missing an opportunity there for some really interesting stuff going on. 40k has a huge array of close quarter weapons: swords, axes, chainsaws, power fists, power claws, lightning claws, thunder hammers. The list goes on and on. So you cannot just dismiss and ignore the close quarter element of the game. This is where the TTK comes into play, because the CQC is an important aspect of the way in which you engage other units. You want to actually be able to do this and get there. Currently, you're only able to cover that distance to close quarters by either making an assault marine using your pack to get up close, which of course is their role, or by making smart moves around buildings and terrain. All valid ways of engaging in close quarters. Having played though the 40k tabletop game, while there is much firing at range, when you get into those CQC situations with two squads or whatever, the fighting is prolonged but furious, So far, EC doesn't replicate to me this thrashing brutality, as the combat is often over fairly quickly, so you're having a lot more one-on-one situations rather than squads coming together and really battling it out, and that's what I want to see. So a small tweak to the TTK would not only give players a higher likelihood to be able to actually reach that combat in a more, exciting way, but also give those hand-to-hand battles a way of, actually happening. Also extend them a little, making them feel more involved in a real battle of skills, especially if you have a whole, like I say, squad bringing into that melee. Now, another key update, and no joke intended, keybinds. The keybinds have now come in, and this is obviously greatly needed for personal customization. And now that it's present, overall play and combat is far more enjoyable. The default binds were not terrible, but with a few tweaks, you can bring them to a more natural feeling, as well as adding some other binds to things like your mouse, etc. Most people have gaming mice with extra, keys there, and just having some functions there makes it feel much more smooth, fluid, natural. Just feels a lot better. Other additional changes have come into play recently in the form of also loadouts, so you can now build specific kits for your units and save them for use in the battlefield. This is fairly standard stuff, but it's been implemented nicely. It will also serve very likely as a portal to their store for you to buy things like skins and shoulder pads to, just gloss and pimp up your characters. The biggest upgrade so far is the visual stuff, the graphics. On entering maps I'd seen previously, as well as new maps, these now seem to be really just glowing, jumping out at you with detail and brightness and, sort of energy weapon detail and things. Very still in the shiny style of Eternal Crusade. I personally always envisioned 40k as an altogether more grubby, gritty style, more like World War I in space, but that's entirely subjective. We now see melted floors and walls from energy weapon blasts, as well as the general look of everything in the game having a higher fidelity. It just feels a lot more finished, far less weird artifacts and sharp glitchy edges. So it's looking a lot more polished. This actually helps a lot as you feel connected to the world you're in. Now, I've always said that graphics are not the most important thing, and that's true of course, but it always helps and is a really nice thing to experience if that's working well. And it does help pull you into the game. It does make you feel more part of, or, you know, the environment and what it is that you're doing, what's happening there. So if you can get it working really, really good, it is actually an excellent thing to sort of bring people into the game. So these new updates are all very welcome to the game, but much more is still required. We need to see things made greatly more stable when it comes to the vehicles, and maybe even some balance in there. Although really, I think until we can bring squads into the game, it's very difficult to properly assess much of this. Vehicle weapons are also going to be very powerful, always, they're designed to be. Coordinated play, as with any large scale team game, is critical, and so being able to bring a squad to prioritise and deal with threats will make a huge difference. I also want to see more content added there, sort of more variety when it comes to things like other vehicles. We could do with some dreadnoughts, land speeders, maybe some bikes and stuff in there. Maybe the current maps are not necessarily going to suit that. Maybe this is something we'll see further down the line, but I'd like to at least see that kind of, like, you know, speculated, thrashed out a little bit, so we can have a little more thought about sort of where we're going with this. Also, we're going to ever have anything like Terminators in there. You know, we really need to sort of think a bit about how some of these mechanics are working. But as I say, until we get some of the basics in there, like squads and that kind of stuff, you know, it's going to be difficult to assess what's going on there. You know, we need to see what impact those squads are going to have in terms of suppressing and neutralizing dangerous threats from the other team, and in doing so enable those random players to make more progress through the map, even if they are uncoordinated. Pre-made squads, it's really the thing we need to see next in Eternal Crusade, and then we can start bringing some really solid conclusions to the table. We also need to see how other races like Eldar and Orc are going to play out, and what they're also going to bring to the table. With Space Marines versus Chaos Space Marines, right now it can sometimes feel a little bit like rock, paper, scissors, so it's going to be interesting, as I say, to see how those other races can mix it up. I would certainly say that we still need to see, you know, more of what Eternal Crusade is going to be made of. We want to see, you know, bring it. We really need to get stuck into this thing. But what I will say is that I was genuinely impressed by the new maps and the updated feel to the game. It's a hell of a lot more playable now than it was previously, but we need to build on that and keep pushing it forward. The Emperor demands satisfaction, and so should we. Tell me your thoughts and questions about Eternal Crusade in the comments. This is Luton.